Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today I'm joined by Carlene Ott, who is the owner of Calculating Grace. And with her business, she helps clients gain awareness around the truth of who they are. She helps them grow and find opportunities to better their lives and the world. So I am so pleased to have you joining us, Carlene. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me and being willing to have this conversation. Really
Yeah, of
appreciate it.
course. Yeah, thank you. So I'd love to do a quick overview for anyone who's not super familiar about what is the difference, what is the overlap between astrology and human design, and get us into that so we can have a really nice conversation where we've got some foundation for that moving forward.
Yeah, that is such a great place to start because most everyone can tell you their astrology sign. A lot of people can tell you their, big three of astrology. And so it's become quite a part of our culture, especially those on the spiritual path.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've noticed with astrology is there's a lot of different parts and there's a lot of different pieces and there's a lot of relationship that is examined. And you think about astrology as you, typically the 12 different signs, the 12 different houses, and then these planets that move through them.
Mm-hmm.
And all the different symbols and meanings that are deeply embedded in all of those that give us the quality of all of that information. So really with human design, where that differs is really more specificity.
Okay.
So if we think of that astrology wheel and that circle with those big pie slices,
Mm-hmm.
you can think about human design. So the signs are that broader piece, like the crust. But when we think about human design, it narrows that in and really gets to the juicy middle of that whatever pie, blueberry. That's like the real sweet stuff, the real sweet spot of very specific information about that piece of the pie. And it really is juicy and delicious because it's so specific that you can't escape it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you can't, once you see it, you can't unsee it about yourself. And you pretty much can't bring more and more awareness about that particular slice of your pie in different areas of your life, different contexts, and you'll start to see it more and more. And for me, it's again about the validity, testing that validity of who you are and who astrology and human design say you are, and being able to figure that out for yourself. Do you, now that you see it more specifically, does it work for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious just hearing all of this, and this wasn't a direction I intended to go, but I have an anticipation that listeners may have the same question. So I've had an astrology reading. I'm familiar with my human design, although I have not had someone professionally take it apart and look at it with me. So I'm looking forward to this. But I've had this conversation before, and I always get this question of like, so where does free will come into play? Like we're looking at all of this and I can look back at like my chart and say, "Oh yeah, those things happened right when, it said they were going to happen." So what does this mean for me in terms of did I make those decisions? Like what did I have agency in this? And am I truly free to decide the course I want to go, or how does this work exactly?
Well, if someone could answer that definitively, I think somehow they would figure out some sort of way to monetize that and
Right.
be like a quadrillionaire. Um, so to say, I don't know that there is an exact answer to that. However, in my limited experience of this work and how it does play out in my experience. I would think of it as if you and I are toddlers
Mhm.
and we'll say source or God or universe is the parent. And the parent has decided that we're going to go to the grocery store. And that's what's happening. We're going to
Mhm.
the grocery store. We're being towed along. And essentially, where the free will comes in my experience, is how how is our relationship with that parent? Do we trust it? Do we
Mhm.
decide to enjoy its presence? Do we have a connection and a relationship with it? And then based on a lot of that, right? Because we're changing environments,
Mhm.
we can have a home environment, but once we go out and have a different environment, we can decide, do we like this environment? How do we react to this environment? How are we going to communicate to our parent how we feel about environment?
Mhm.
So, and you, as a mother of four, know how many different ways a trip to the store with a
This is true.
toddler can go,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
so that to me is our free will,
Mhm.
is how is that trip to the store going to go?
Yeah. Yeah. I would also add in a piece of something that I've been really exploring lately, which I got pinged to look into this is I think perhaps there is this bit of prior to this incarnative experience, I kind of got to lay a groundwork for what I wanted to experience and how I wanted to learn and plan out my course, right? My life course of study. And I think that when we dip into this material stuff, that we pull with us all of those courses that we want to study so that yeah, I can look ahead. Like it's not quite as predictive necessarily as we might think it is. I can look ahead and there are themes that I see coming up. And I can say, wow, I wonder if that theme is going to play out with this person in this space, but I truly don't know. I can only say, well, there's a theme coming up of this, and I can be aware of that and prepare for it. But it's like, you're right. It's like this overall there are 500 million different books about the theme of growing up, of coming of age. But what's going to happen in that book? I couldn't tell you. The dialogue, I couldn't tell you. The descriptions of the characters, I have no idea. But there's a theme that we can chart these on. And I think that for me is kind of how I view it, at least.
I think that's absolutely another component. Uh, and I love that you brought that up because I feel so strongly in that as well. Um, there's a part of astrology that we haven't used. You talked about an overlap in astrology and human
Mhm.
design, and I think that that's perfect for this topic is when I actually just recently found this new method of predicting
Mhm.
using astrological techniques with human design.
Mhm.
That is when again, there's that specificity that's, you can't unsee that.
Mhm.
You can't take that away from your future mind. And it's it's groundbreaking, I feel. And I'm making the making the foundation and building the groundwork to put that out there. But it's very intricate, it's very detailed and very labor intensive to get it
Mhm.
all
I
ready.
imagine, yeah.
It's though so edifying and so helped me in particular have much more of a clear vision
Mm.
and trust and certainty of where I'm going and what I'm in for. And like you said, you don't know who actually it's going to, and maybe will misinterpret. it a
Mhm.
bit, but at least we'll have some sort of ballpark.
Yeah.
And I think that is transformative. So,
Mhm. Before we jump full both feet into this, because you have in your hands my whole future right now, which is a bit exciting and intimidating. I'm just curious to know what drew you into this space. Like, how did you follow your passion into this?
well, a lot of it was overcoming all of the obstacles to follow my passion.
Mm,
So, one was not even acknowledging that I had this passion or this, and it started really when I was doing all the socially acceptable things. I was going to school, going to college, getting married, having kids, buying a house, check, check, check.
mhm,
And I was struggling. I was, I identify as ADHD, and yet I was somehow running a house, hiring and managing a nanny,
mhm,
and then having a full-time job, trying to be the best wife I can, and definitely sacrificing myself pretty much fully. And basically any self-care was almost happenstance. And I definitely did not have that picture of my life after checking all those boxes to end up where I was.
mhm,
And after my firstborn, I was in a pretty good postpartum depression and was fighting my way out, doing all of the therapy, reading so many books, and doing work that I can to be a conscious, intentional parent, and also still very much in survival mode. And then one day I found a connection that I was very interested in, and it was very intriguing. They were very caring, uh, observant, and just fun to talk to. And I really, that was the biggest thing. It's like I really enjoyed our conversations and just the connections and perception. And it was just, and being able to have a perception of myself from them
mhm,
and understanding myself a little bit better through their eyes and most and positively. So that was this beautiful gift they gave me. And so that was just a regular party conversation, right? There was this guy, and, he wasn't sure if there was trouble in paradise. And so he asked me out to breakfast. I went back to my husband. I was like, I'm going to this breakfast. And then he's like, I don't know, that's a good idea. And I'm like, I'm going anyway. That was like my first really, truly rebellious act of self care, to
yeah.
be like, I enjoy this connection. I want more of it. And I'm doing it. And in an hour and a half, turns out it was not a good idea because I fell in love with him.
Mm,
And I had to go home and I had to Google, like, what does it feel like to fall in love? And yep, it was definitely that. And then I had to do so much introspection and stepping away from that, and trying to see how that can work where I am,
mm,
because I had the two kids at that point, and that just did not make sense to me to abandon ship, no matter if he seemed to match the pages of my diary
mm,
of what I wanted in a man or not. It didn't matter. That was not where I was. So, really, what I did at that point, because again, I had to find what I could do where I was and what I committed to and what I'm willing to live with for the rest of my life. and I started a business. I said, okay, well, I guess if I'm going to be location and time free at some point in my life, I should start now.
Yeah.
So I started the business, and I found a big name coach online who had a school. And one of the bonuses was there's this side group called the Woo Crew. And I was like, oh, what is that?
Mm.
And I could tell you, it just felt like the most like icky, dirty thing for me to be doing, to check out that group
Mm.
and start to explore all the different curiosities I have, and being willing to put aside all my scientific, pharmacist mind skepticism, and just be open to the experiences and to see if they were true for me or not.
Yeah.
And so that is really what led me to human design, was following just curiosities within that group, following learning and taking in all the information about woo that I had previously, shunned because my family did. That's Christians, very staunch Christians. And it was interesting because when I received my first human design chart, I tried to like dissect it and tried to chart it out and map it all out. And I was so confused and overwhelmed. It wasn't even funny. And also, I couldn't find any resources that made any sense to me.
Yeah.
And so it became a 5-year journey now of exploring and building my own hypotheses and testing with other people and myself. And finally, I found a human design mentor just this past August and September that I was willing to dive all in with, to get a real sense of foundation with human design. And that has been so key in order to validate my own hypotheses and expand
Yeah.
all of my learnings. And she's also a business mentor. So that's been putting pretty much everything into
Mm.
place
Yeah.
for me to really get started, and feeling so much more confident now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Here, it's funny because we've had conversations before this, and I trust you just based off of energetically how you show up. But hearing that background and understanding how scientific you are and how you had these maybe conditionings coming into this that allow you to be skeptical and curious in a way that like lends even more credence and power to the work that you're delivering to your clients. Like it's not just like you dove in and you were like, oh, this is cool, this is exciting, this is fun. You were like, I'm going to dive in and I'm going to ask all the questions and tear it apart. And if it stands up under my scrutiny, now I've really got something. So I really love hearing you say that, because it makes me trust you deeply with when I hear you talk about this. I really know that you've tested it. And yeah, so thank you for that.
yeah, well, I'm so glad that you can feel that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So where do we want to dive in? You kind of gave a little teaser of, so you had said send me your information. We'll run this chart. And now I've seen my human design before, and like you said, it is like looking at a different language, like a pictographical language, not even like Spanish. So it is a whole different language with all kinds of pieces that are moving and working. So I can't say that I feel super confident in knowing what in the world I'm looking at. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as I said, I understand that feeling. It's not a great feeling. And so I'm so happy that we get to do a little bit of work together here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Really
I'm
happy
really,
that the listeners are going to get to hear this and understand like what an integral piece to understanding themselves, to gaining clarity around the way they show up in the world, and to giving them confidence moving forward as well, like that this can be for them.
yeah, I love that. I hope, I hope everyone can have that. Ah, so, okay, so I am going to give a little bit of background around how I got here about what I'm going to share with you today. So, I had a really hard time with English and understanding how to tell stories, how to present information. I would simply dive into whatever the experience was, where I was now, and what I wanted to share. And so it has taken me a very long time in order to get all the pieces and kind of understand of how communication flows.
Mhm.
And so to say that there is a way that we can talk about ourselves and learn about ourselves that allows us to understand that big picture, that context of who is in this story, what are they doing,
Mhm.
why are they doing it, and how
Mhm.
how do you plan to do this?
Yeah.
And before you can get into all of that fun stuff of that predictive work and oh yeah, this is what you're potentially going to do in 2005 and etc., you have to have that overall understanding of that, of your story.
Yeah.
And what I had really found is within human design, within astrology, everything that you see is not who you are right now.
Mm.
It is a picture of what is possible for you
Mm.
if you choose to step into and grow into your chart. And I think that's why I wanted to really focus on growth because there's this misconception of this is who you are,
Mm.
period.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that's not, in my experience, how that works.
Yeah.
Now it can inform different states of being. Like if you talk about the gene keys give you a state of being that you might be able to recognize what state of being you're in, a shadow or a state of fear, or a gift, which is to me like a neutral. You overcame your fears and you're able to reach a neutral sense. And then that's the gift. And then the city is that state of being of love, which to me is really the whole point of all of this is to get to that experience of love. And so when we think about, you can just see there that's an evolution of states of being. That's a growth that you would have had done in order to get to that city or state of love. And I think what we also miss in evolution is it's not a straight line.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if we think about plants, we watch plants grow. It's someone put together, I think it was a dahlia, a video of a time lapse and how it would expand and then retract,
Mm.
expand a little more and retract, and then the next layer and expand and retract. And it was the most gorgeous way of viewing our own growth and expansion,
Yeah.
and thinking about how, as we become more solid in who we are and stand firm about those things, start to be able to feel it, live it, communicate it, then there's more layers of us that can expand and open,
Mm.
because there's more recognition, there's more the environment, maybe someone will move a shade so we can more fully bloom. It, I think a big part of us growing into who we are is getting other people to agree with that
Wow. Yeah.
and be on board with who you are and what you stand for, and coming along for that mission, along however big or small their part is. Like, for instance, for you, it's, passionate pursuits. I had to come along with your mission and say, I agree that I have a passionate pursuit and I would like to share it with you.
Yeah.
We can only be who we are in a very small area until we start sharing and growing that.
Yeah. Yeah. That gets into my theory of nothing exists in isolation.
Yeah.
Like, really, no thing can exist in isolation, or it isn't a thing at all. And so we only become that thing when we rub up against these other things, and that helps us define what we are uniquely in our own expression. So I love that picture. It's beautiful.
Yeah. I love that explanation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. So that is the background of why we need this big picture, like your
Mhm.
big soul picture, I call
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And so I'll tell you a little bit about mine, and then we'll dive into a little bit of yours.
Cool. Sounds fun.
So, yeah. So when we think about our big picture, and this also came about with thinking about a business lens
Mm-hmm.
and almost being able to use who you are as the frame of your business.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think about the vision and we think about, oh, well, what would my vision be? I think about it as your ascendant. It's this evolution of a destiny. So your personality ascendant in human design not only has sign, but it has the human design gate. So mine is a sign of Taurus, but very specifically, it's the human design gate of 23.5, which is going to be fun because you actually have that too in your chart. So we'll be talking about that. But the 23.5 is assimilation, and assimilation has to do with accumulating knowledge and wisdom and being able to layer it in with your existing beliefs and values, and not necessarily changing your foundation, but being able to add in layers. And so that is my evolution. And I work in hospice.
Mm.
I always am aware that at any point it's possible my life could end. So I'm always pushing forward to my next part of my life. And so part of what I found with this was my dreams have so okay, so that's let me come back. So that ascendant to me is part of my expansion.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the growth, that's the opening, that's the making myself bigger, putting my energy out there. And that is a part of the vision of who I am and who I'm becoming. And again, that big picture vision.
Yeah.
Now, what had been really important to me is finding that retraction,
Mm.
and what is it that is really helping me go inward and close up a little bit so I can expand more later. So
Mm.
I found that to be, I mean, it actually says in the gene keys evolution is your personality earth. So when we think about using your personality earth as a way of evolving, but through retracting, mine is to make sense of the past.
Mm.
So that's the human design gate 64, which is Virgo. So I find routines and systems and patterns, and I do that while I'm making sense of the past. So I essentially, everything that I've done to look at my whole journey has been part of this going back into myself so I can come back out and talk about this information that I've accumulated.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so every time, after we have this podcast, I'll probably meditate and contemplate how this podcast went and what I can do
Mm.
differently. And that would help me in my evolution of talking again later and
Yeah.
spreading information later. And it's this beautiful evolution that I'm going through, and that I can trust that it's going to come more and more solid, steady, helpful, and firm in me.
Mm-hmm.
That is what we'll talk about with you
Okay.
next. Find your vision and find that big picture for you, and
Yeah.
how you can understand yourself in the expansion and retraction.
Mhm.
Yeah. But
Okay.
first I want to hear your thoughts of hearing the concept and how you're hearing my vision of myself. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really beautiful to hear you talk about yourself in that way. And I think that so many of us are so accustomed to this like negative self-talk. But when we can really understand that, like, for example, it's okay if I need to process things deeply because that's part of the way that I was designed to grow, is actually to retract and process so that I can grow and flourish. And I think what you're giving people the opportunity to do is to love themselves more deeply and to have more compassion and more understanding for why they show up in the world the way that they do. So, yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm glad that makes sense. And I'm excited to dive into yours. And another reason why I love this is because we could talk very openly about, what is part of this. Then you can go out back and you can dive into it more yourself,
Yeah.
find different resources. You'll be led by your intuition to what you need to do. And I just think that is so beautiful and exciting. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to share this with you. I hope you'll be able to enjoy it for many years.
Yeah. Thank
Your
you.
whole life. Okay, so when we talk about Bridget and we think about that vision and big picture of evolution, so, and I'll want to hear your thoughts because, of course, you're going to have your own experience of this. So when we think about expansion, we have the ascendant of Cancer, which you might have known already.
Yep.
And in particular, you probably have not looked up your human design ascendant, have you?
No.
Yes. So your human design ascendant is 52.6.
Okay.
And what that is about essentially is the evolution to keeping still of inaction.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And in particular with the sixth line, that would have you could say that it could be about tranquility.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And so when you think about, well, here, let me go ahead into your retraction because I would love to hear how you, if you feel that they're connected and how
Yeah.
you see yourself going back and forth if you do.
Mhm.
Okay, so yeah, thinking about how there's this evolution arc of, yeah, you're working towards being able to be still for long periods of time, and that when you can sit in this energy, it'll allow you to find your focus and then eventually go back out. That's the arc of stillness. However, we have the grounding or retracting energy of your personality earth, which is 23, which is
Mm,
assimilation. It's the same. So is to me, given that you have a podcast and that I've listened to many of your podcasts, and
mm.
I already know that you take in a lot of information and you've been building this foundation and adding to this wisdom that you've definitely have so much of already. And you can picture that as like a retracting of a way to like pull your resources back into your center in order to be able to go back out and shine in your stillness and your tranquility. I'm wondering, what is your experience of that
Yeah. Wow.
growth?
I'm feeling a little bit naked right now. So
Yeah.
only because yeah, that personality earth totally makes sense. I am a huge consumer and collector of information and knowledge and stories. Like I just love people's stories. And I do find myself residing frequently in this gray space of I actually don't know if truth exists, but I want to hear all the pieces of it that people bring so we can create this collective truth, right? Like I feel like we get closer to an embodiment of truth when we all can bring our pieces together. So that makes sense. And I feel called out by this keeping still and inaction because two reasons. Number one, after I had my pretty much my near death experience and went through a really, really difficult time, a way that I found to deal with that was meditation, stillness, like intentionally embodying this emptiness and darkness. And I think that people don't have to go through that really difficult dark night of the soul if they can bring themselves and invite themselves into this like cool, dark stillness, which is really scary for people, I think, sometimes. But I find myself more and more being an advocate of the darkness, an advocate of silence, an advocate of the empty space where people are like, it's so dark and it's so empty and it's so quiet that like I can only see myself and it's terrifying. And I'm like, yes, great. Now we're getting somewhere. um, but also I see that as a major challenge for me. And it's interesting because the people closest to me in like my inner circle continue to speak into me and say, I know that your power exists in your quiet stillness. And they've said, you need to spend more time in that space. I know that more of you is going to come out when you go in and spend more time in that space. And I'm like, oh, but it's so hard to find the time. And I know that's the answer. And I just had this conversation with someone and she's going to listen and she's going to go, I told you. um, but yeah, that's definitely
Wow.
the theme. Yep, absolutely. And I just recorded a podcast earlier today, this morning, with someone who told me, when I'm in your presence, it's really peaceful and still. So we'll have the evidence of that. I mean, it's going to be posted, so everyone's going to get to hear that came before this. So no one colluded here to make these things work together.
Yeah. And I do appreciate that that call out that, yeah, to me, these are all calculations. We can look at your calculations and see
Mhm.
what they come out to be. And anyone who's a skeptic, we can look at your calculations as well.
Yeah.
They're just numbers, and they don't have to be scary.
Right.
And yeah, so I love that you so deeply see both of those parts in you.
Yeah.
And I'm just really curious, how do you feel differently, if any way, to be able to look at one as an expansion and another as a retraction and a period of growth? Like, how does that feel to have that context between those two things?
Yeah, it's really interesting because thinking of stillness as expansion seems counterintuitive, right? Like that was my first reaction to it, was like, well, how in the world how am I evolving towards keeping still and inaction? Like that seems so odd. So I'd really love to get into a discussion of that, because I'm starting to see how that can be, but it's still like, oh, how strange to see it in that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are your
Yeah.
thoughts about that?
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to that, what you said about that who we are doesn't really mean anything until it rubs up against other people.
Mm,
And so what I'm hearing is that if you are able to claim that part of yourself, to say, this is who I am, this is what I'm meant to do, this is how I want to help people, like this is my vision, essentially, of how I am who I am. And essentially, when you have a vision of who you are, you can help other people achieve that vision as well
mhm,
for themselves. And so you being able to facilitate that for others, as you talked about, being willing to go into that dark soul place without having to go into the night
mhm,
part alone. If you have been finding yourself advocating for that more and more, finding those places where it would just make sense, that it just feels easy
yeah,
and good to open up space, physical spaces or online spaces,
mhm,
to facilitate that for people so they don't have to go through it alone.
yeah,
And I think that's one thing that I definitely would wish for everyone, that they don't have to go through these dark nights of the soul alone. When I figured out that I was falling in love with that guy, I was so alone because I had narrowed my world down to mostly my husband and my kids, who I'm not going to put my adult problems on. So it's
mhm,
really
yeah,
just my husband and, my therapist. And my therapist at the time was invalidating me.
mm,
And so I was not only trying to get help and reaching out for help, but I felt even more alone and confused
mm,
and doubting myself and my experience. And if I had someone else who had been through something like that before and could speak to me about it and potentially popped up in my Facebook ads, I would have welcomed that in my world because I was searching for help. And I know that there's so many people that would love to have that help from someone who so clearly can see that that's what they're meant to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I've had many iterations. I'm a manifesting generator, and I try all the things and I do all the things and I experiment with everything. And in fact, I had a podcast recording where one of my former students said, "Oh, like, I think it was like 15 years ago, you told us that it's okay to pursue multiple paths because it's something that, you've done in your life. And it's okay to continually reinvent yourself." And I was like, wow, that's such an MG thing to say. But um, um, but I found myself as part of those paths in the space of being a birth doula, because I think that there's this time at the beginning of life and at the end of life where we enter this really still, almost frozen, like sacred space. And there's this thick presence that's there in that space. And I wanted to be there. Like, I had this desire to be and to hold that container for people. So I don't feel like all of these different things that I've done have been off the path. I feel like they were just gathering information that's prepping me to be able to do that for people. So thank you for connecting those dots.
Oh, I'm so excited for you. And that's only one of the four parts of the big picture. And then
Yeah.
that's not even second stage. There's 3 more stages after this to to dive into yourself. There's a world of depth and clarity
Mhm.
that I just, yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
excited to start sharing with people. So I'm so glad that you so deeply resonated.
For
And,
sure. Yeah.
and even though it's a little bit odd feeling and a different perception, bringing your perception to a different place, that you're open and willing to consider that. And I'm really excited to keep in touch and see
Yeah.
how you're going to expand on that.
Yeah. For
So, so many people need that.
Yes, they do. And I would love for you to just let us know if a listener is like, okay, this sounds fascinating. I'm totally like, I want someone to help me, walk me through this. How can people find a way to do that with you?
You can right now find me on Instagram at Calculating Grace. And I would love to have you DM me and let me know if you're interested in starting this work together. And we can get you all set up.
Beautiful. That sounds wonderful. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. So it's really easy for people to find you and get in touch with you. And I know that you and I and so many others in this space really just love to connect with people. So even if it's like, you know what, I just want to have a conversation with you. I know you're open to that. I know I'm always open to that. There's no risk in reaching out to us and saying, you just said something and I want to talk to you about it. No risk in like, I'm going to try to sell you on this or that, we genuinely, when we enter these worlds and these spaces where we're pursuing our passions and we're responding to like a higher calling, we genuinely just want to serve people. It's from this place of, look at all these things like in my life that I have done, and now I want to be able to offer that work to someone else. I just want to serve people. So reach out to us, please send us a message, ask us questions, and we can't wait to interact with you and to hopefully find a way in which we can serve you. So thank you, Carlene, for joining me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Bridget, thank you so much for having me in this conversation.